This is going to be a deck tech on ninjas for Magic the Gathering Commander. So with ninjas in Magic the Gathering, you have a pretty nice selection of ninjas, but you really probably only have one option as far as commanders go. So most of the decks that you're going to encounter that are ninja decks are probably going to be using one particular commander. So we're going to start off by talking about her first. This is her, Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow. And she has an extremely useful ability that you're really going to want to build your whole deck around. And I'm just going to show you guys my deck, which I've been messing around with for the last year and just sort of gradually refining it so that you can kind of get an idea of what I try to do with my deck. This deck is really built for fun, although it does win a good amount. So with, I think if you want to go whole hog and just really refine it, you may find that it can be a good winner for you. Although once people figure out what your commander does, if they're not familiar with it, they're probably going to hate your deck just a little bit, and you may get a lot of aggro from it. But here's the basic trick. Yuriko's commander ability, you'll see that it only costs 2 to use, and it's a blue and a black, and it says return an unblocked attacker you control to hand. Put this card onto the battlefield from your hand or the command zone, tapped and attacking. And then her ability is whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's converted mana cost. All right, so what that means is basically anytime you can get your opponent to not block or not be able to block any creature that you send at them, then you have an opportunity to throw your commander onto the battlefield for only the cost of a blue and a black. And that's never going to go up because you're not casting it from the command zone in the traditional way. So you're not, if Yuriko gets killed and goes back to the command zone, you don't have to pay the commander tax to hardcast her again, and you don't have to pay any commander tax to use her commander ninjutsu ability. So it's always just 2. So it's really mana efficient, and if you can get her on the board and then have unblocked ninjas attacking your opponents, then you'll be able to do quite a lot of damage. And if you're playing against 3 other players in like a 4-player game, you'll be hitting every one of those players with these attacks. So it can quickly turn into everyone trying to kill you, but if you're quick enough and you get the drop on them, you may be able to take them all out before they're actually able to develop a board state that's significant enough to slow you down. So Yuriko is very useful in that regard because she only costs 2 when you use that ability. And if you have to hard cast her from the command zone, she only costs 3. And I've done that sometimes. It's not ideal, but sometimes you just need that ability on the field in order to get your game moving and get your deck working properly. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how you're going to get people to not block what you've got. You're going to do a lot of unblockable attacks, and I've chosen for my deck a number of fairly inexpensive cards that will allow you to do unblocked attacks, and then you haven't spent a whole lot of mana to get them out onto the field, and so you don't really feel bad that you're having to take them off the field again. And of course, many of them have effects when they come on and off the battlefield because you're likely to be pulling them back and substituting a ninja your commander, maybe one of the other ninjas who has the ninjutsu ability, and we'll look at those in a minute. Or you're casting them back and forth, and you're just trying to create a situation where all of these opportunities for your commander's ability to go off actually happen. So for example, Slitherblade is the first one here on the list. It only costs 1 blue, and it can't be blocked. So it's not a ninja, but since it can't be blocked, you can turn it into a ninja, because any of your ninja who have ninjutsu, including your commander, can then be substituted in for this card. This card goes back into your hand, and there's no field bad because you only spent 1 mana getting it onto the field. And then it's very easy to cast again because it still just costs you 1 mana to put it back onto the field from your hand. Likewise with Mistcloaked Herald, also can't be blocked, only costs 1 blue. And then Changeling Outcast only costs 1 black. This one's particularly helpful because in addition to it being unblockable, it's also a changeling, so it can be any card type. So according to the way our commander card reads, if this is a ninja and your changeling becomes a ninja, then her ability goes off. And then you get that opportunity to pull a card off the top of your deck and do damage equal to the converted mana cost of the card. All right, so then Thalakos Seeker is the next one, and this is still only 2 mana costs. This one has Shadow, which is an older keyword, but it's still useful for what we want to do here. And it just says this creature can block or be blocked by only creatures with Shadow. And then when Thalakos Seeker leaves the battlefield, draw a card. So this is kind of an easy choice when you're thinking about putting this into a ninja deck, because it's got the unblockable, it's cheap to get onto the field, and then it's also, when it leaves the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So you're getting a little card advantage too, because if you pull this back, you're probably dropping it again, and maybe you get to pull it back again. You might get to do that several times in a game, which gives you several additional cards. The next one, Tetsuko, her card reads, creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. So she gives unblockable to potentially quite a few cards. And there you're going to see that I have some cards in here that are not unblockable. So she's useful to have in that regard, because not only does she give herself unblockable with that ability, but she also can grant that to any of your sort of low tier characters. And then I've also had some games that were where I had somebody pull something like Elesh Norn onto the field, and that actually triggered a whole bunch of cards, a whole bunch of creatures that I had that were unblockable before. Elesh Norn's -2/-2 brought them down to the point where Tetsuko could give them all unblockable. So that was normally a card like Elesh Norn is kind of a nightmare. But in a few cases that I played, it was actually worked out really great to have that card. Then there's Neither Traitor, which also has Shadow, and it has an effect where you can pull it from your graveyard under certain conditions too. So it's useful in that regard, cheap to cast. And then there's the somewhat infamous Invisible Stalker, which in addition to being unblockable also has hexproof. So this card can be actually surprisingly difficult for your opponents to deal with. It's still only 2 to cast it, and you can very easily get it in there and have it be, an unblocked attack. And then, of course, with hexproof, it can't be the target of spells or abilities that your opponents control. So you have an opportunity to use, your ninjutsu on it, but your opponents can't, use targeted removal and things like that on it. And then Baleful Strix is the last of our 2-cost casts. It's kind of a useful one in that it has flying, so there'll be some decks that you'll, especially early on in a game, where they won't be able to block you because you'll have flying. It's also got Death Touch, so they may not want to block you under some circumstances because the only thing that they have to block with is something that they don't want to lose. So it can kind of intimidate a little bit. And then it also has this text: when Baleful Strix enters the battlefield, draw a card. So again, if you're using this one to piggyback ninjas onto, then you're getting activations of ninjutsu and being able to put ninjas in place of Baleful Strix. And then you get to cast it again for only 2 and draw another card. So you're gaining more card advantage. All right, continuing to the CMC 3 mana cost cards, we're getting into some ninjas now. There's, like I said, there's kind of a decent, sort of modest amount of ninjas in Magic the Gathering. There's enough to do this, and there's enough other cards that I think it can work as a cohesive whole, as a themed deck. Vampire Ninja is pretty straightforward. Unblocked attacking ninjas you control have lifelink. So this is in there so that you can gain a little bit of extra life as you go along. And there'll be other cards which we'll talk about when we get further into this deck tech that will also be able to give him unblockable in various ways too. And then we have Phantom Ninja. He just straight up can't be blocked, so he's perfect for our purposes. Still only a 3 CMC, so he's not painful to get back onto the field. And then Mistblade Shinobi. He's a 3 CMC, and he has ninjutsu. So the wording there, if you can't read it, is return an unblocked attacker you control to hand, put this card onto the battlefield from your hand, tapped and attacking. So I really like Mistblade Shinobi for his special ability too, which is whenever Mistblade Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. So this is a great card for wreaking havoc over and over, especially if you have him popping in and out. You know, if you have a way to make him unblockable so that you're not only getting your commander's ability to go off, but you also have him doing damage consistently, then you can really wreak a lot of havoc, especially with commander decks that really rely on certain cards, like a commander deck that obviously relies on its commander, as this one kind of does. You have the opportunity to keep throwing that commander back into the command zone, or into their hand in this case, or maybe they have another card that is very expensive cast. Maybe they put a lot of mana into like a 8 CMC creature that they're about to start laying into you with, and then you have to make them eat that cost, which they're not going to be too happy about. So this is kind of an aggro card, but it will give you an advantage. And then there's Mist Syndicate Naga. And Mist Syndicate Naga has the ninjutsu ability, and then it also has, whenever Mist Syndicate Naga deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of Mist Syndicate Naga. So this one's pretty useful too, because you can get more ninjas on the field. And if you're able to create a board state where you can throw enough ninjas at your opponent, or at least more ninjas than they can block, then you've got unblocked ninjas, and then your commander's ability is going off. So he's an inexpensive way to put that option onto the field. Continuing to the 4 CMC cost is Spark Double. Now, Spark Double is kind of an interesting card for this deck because it allows you to do something kind of unique with your commander. It has a great synergy with your commander if you can pull it off. So Spark Double reads, you may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature. It enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. So that last part is the real interesting bit, because normally we can't make copies of Yuriko because she's a legendary creature. There's only, fairly small number of circumstances in Magic in which you can get around the legendary rule, and this is one of them. You can create a Spark Double of her, has the same ability, and then if you can get your ninjas unblocked and firing off, then you have your commander's ability going off twice, which is even more devastating. So that's a nice one to do. It's going to involve, timing it correctly and making sure that you're set up to do it, that your board state is set up to do it, but it can work gangbusters and just really make your deck kill things even faster. All right, the next card is Sakasima's Student. This is another ninjutsu card, only 2 CMC in order to use this card's ninjutsu. And its text is, you may have Sakasima's Student enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's still a ninja in addition to its other creature types. So this gives you some flexibility. Because this can be a ninja, in addition to everything else, you can have it come in as a copy of something that you're playing that's not a ninja, maybe. Like Invisible Stalker, for example, you can have it come in as a copy of that, so it's hexproof, and it's unblockable, and it's also a ninja, so your commander's ability is going off. Or you can play around with it and have it copy something really, nasty, like an Eldrazi big monster card that's got Annihilate or something like that on it, and make it something that your opponents maybe can't block or don't want to block or something like that, and maybe still get your ninja ability going off. Whatever you decide, this card can potentially wreak a nice bit of havoc on the board. And then Ninja of the Deep Hours. This one has 2 CMC to use its ninjutsu, and then whenever Ninja of the Deep Hours deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So again, you're getting some more card advantage from using this ninja, and then you're getting the ninja action to go off too. Moonblade Shinobi is kind of an interesting one. It's a sort of an outlier in some senses. It's a 3 CMC to use its ninjutsu, and it reads, whenever Moonblade Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 blue illusion token with flying. So this one's kind of interesting because it can create a whole lot of flying blockers for you. And that can be pretty useful, especially if you can create more copies of Moonblade Shinobi, which we'll talk in a little bit about how you can do that with this particular deck. All right, the next one is Ingenious Infiltrator, 2 CMC for its ninjutsu ability. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. More card advantage, easy enough. And then we have Evil Twin, which is obviously not a ninja, but is kind of interesting for this deck. The Evil Twin reads, you may have Evil Twin enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it gains spend a blue and a black and tap. destroy target creature with the same name as this creature. So you can do a couple of things with this. You can create a copy of one of your opponent's cards that's giving you a rough time, and then destroy it, and then you have that card and they don't. Or you can create a copy of one of your other ninjas. And that can be useful too, for all of the reasons that we've already discussed. So that's one of the reasons why I like this card for this deck, is it's pretty flexible for what you're trying to do. The next one is Etrata the Silencer. Now this is a legendary creature, so it can be your commander for a deck like this, and I've seen some people use it in place of Yuriko for a ninja deck, and I think it can work really well. I've got it in here just as a regular card, and I like having it in here, even though in a game of Commander you may not get the full use out of her abilities. You still get to wreak a little bit of havoc with her, and she is unblockable. So her text reads that she can't be blocked, and then whenever Etrata deals combat damage to a player, exile target creature that player controls and put a hit counter on that card. That player loses the game if they own 3 or more exiled cards with hit counters on them. Etrata's owner shuffles Etrata into her library. So that's not bad. Even in Commander, where you're maybe not going to get all 3 of those hit counters because of the size of the deck and the lower likelihood that you're going to come upon this card again, you still get an unblockable character which can come back into your hand, so you can cast her again. And you also get an opportunity to take something off the board, something that's maybe giving you some trouble. And that can, as we know, can be really invaluable as just targeted removal. And then there's Clever Impersonator. Clever Impersonator reads, you may have Clever Impersonator enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. So enormous flexibility here. Copying any of your ninja cards or anything else that's not legendary, or even copying enchantments or artifacts with this. That can be just as useful, and I've done things like that before too, where I've doubled up on something, like I have propaganda out and I want to just double up that effect. Then sometimes Clever Impersonator doesn't become a creature. Sometimes it just becomes the thing it needs to be in that moment. And of course, if you have this become an unblockable creature, like you have it become Invisible Stalker, then you can bring it back to your hand with ninjutsu, and then you can recast it as something different. So it's got a lot of flexibility there also. Now, moving into the 5 CMC category is, the first one is Throat Slitter. This is a rat ninja, and it has 3 CMC for its ninjutsu effect, and its ability is whenever Throat Slitter deals combat damage to a player, destroy target non-black creature that player controls. So this is some nice targeted removal right here too, especially coming out of nowhere. If you use ninjutsu and you have this ninja drop in on top of one of your other cards that's being replaced with your ninjutsu ability, then you can surprise your opponent and do a targeted removal on a creature that's giving you some trouble or that they're relying on a lot. All right, the next one is Okiba Gang Shinobi. 4 CMC for the ninjutsu on this card, so it's getting a little more pricey to use that effect. So you have to decide if you think it's worth it or not. Many times it is, but it depends. Magic is a game of change. But its ability is whenever Okiba Gang Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. So this can be useful. I think it's maybe a little situational, depending on how good the card draw is of your opponent. But you can use this to, narrow their options a bit, especially if you notice that maybe they don't have a lot of cards in their hand to begin with, and they don't have anything on the board that's causing them to draw cards and get card advantage. Then you can exploit that. This deck is a little bit predatory in that sense. You can exploit that and further reduce their options, which would end a game, much quicker. The next one, Ninja of the New Moon, again, 4 CMC to use ninjutsu. It doesn't have any special abilities, but it does hit for 6. So if you find yourself needing to do a little bit more damage, then Ninja of the New Moon is pretty useful because it can get in there with a little bit bigger hit, maybe at a key moment. The next one is Higuri the Still Wind, 4 CMC for his ninjutsu. And then his ability is whenever Higuri the Still Wind deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a ninja card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. So that's useful right there, but what is really useful about this card is his other ability. For 2 colorless mana, you can cause target ninja creature to become unblockable this turn. And this does not require him to become tapped or anything either. So as long as you've got the mana to pay for it, you can make multiple ninjas unblockable this turn. So not every ninja has unblockable on them, but this card can make them unblockable. So I think this is a really useful card for this deck. Next up, we have Gas Lord of Fugue. He is not a ninja. He's a spirit. And, normally I might not be looking to put spirits into a ninja deck, but he's unblockable. And he also has a pretty useful ability. Now, he's a bit pricey with 5 CMC, so I don't know if you're going to want to pull him out of the game to use ninjutsu. I mean, if you have an opportunity for a killing blow or something, certainly do so. But 5 CMC is something to consider when you're thinking about pulling him out and then recasting him. But his ability is potentially very useful. Whenever Gas Lord of Fugue deals combat damage to a player, that player reveals his or her hand. Choose a card from it. That player removes that card from the game. Now, I've had games where this card actually has won me the game because you get to just, in a targeted way, you get to just prune your opponent's deck. You get to prune their hand and take away all of their cool stuff. And if you manage to work it out where he hits every turn, you're just devastating them. Now, they may come up with counters for that, but even if you only get it in 1 or 2 times, it can be the difference. All right, and then there's Fallen Shinobi. His ninjutsu is 4 CMC, and his ability is whenever Fallen Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library. Until end of turn, you may play those cards without paying their mana costs. All right, so the exile part is not really the part that excited me, but being able to play their cards without paying the mana cost, you literally get to, you get lands off of them if they have that. You get their soul ring, you get their big creature, or you get a fancy spell, and you don't have to pay for it. And they don't get to use it. So that's pretty good. You might wind up with one of their creatures on your field, so you got an extra blocker or something like that. And that's why I put that in here, is that that ability can cause a lot of trouble for your opponent. All right, and the last 2 creature cards in this deck, we have Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni. This is a legendary rat ninja, so can be your commander in a different kind of ninja deck. 5 CMC to cast ninjutsu with this creature. So getting a bit pricey, but it might be worth it. Let's look at her ability. Whenever Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni, deals combat damage to a player, you may put target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So again, this is a situational thing, but if you know for a fact that your opponent has just put one of their big creatures into their graveyard, you can yank it out of their graveyard and put it on the field, working for you. So it might be worth that 5 CMC, especially if you're going to get something extremely useful out of what they're doing. The other thing that's kind of useful about her is that she's still going to hit, and she hits for 5. So we're getting a little bit better damage numbers. Again, with this deck, your damage numbers are not really coming from your creatures actually hitting. They're coming from your commander's ability. But having one of these creatures, they are still hitting, and having one of them hit for 5 damage is still nice. It's better than, 1 or 2. All right, and the last creature is Silent Blade Oni. And that's 6 CMC to activate his ninjutsu if you want to sub him in for an unblocked creature. He hits for 6, so, decent there. But his ability is whenever Silent Blade Oni deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand. You may cast a non-land card in it without paying that card's mana cost. So similar to the Gas Lord of the Fugue, it does some work for you. If you can get it out there. A little bit expensive, but it can still shift the dynamics of the board pretty dramatically. The other thing that's kind of useful about it, and one of the reasons why I keep it in here, aside from its ability, is its mana cost. So it costs 7. Its converted mana cost is 7. And since we're working with a commander who does most of the damage that you're getting onto your opponent from this deck is your commander's ability, where you're drawing a card and everybody at the table is taking damage based on the CMC of the card that you draw when your commander's ability goes off. 7 is nice. So you just hit an opponent for 6 if you hit regularly with this, but if you draw this, it goes into your hand, card advantage, and then also you get to do that 7 damage. So we're getting up into the sort of higher levels of being able to do more damage with this deck. On the whole, most of these creatures, I kept them fairly inexpensive for the most part. And I felt like that was the way to go, because sometimes you do have to just hard cast creatures and get something onto the field in order to get your ninjas working. All right, let's talk about the rest of the deck now. So I'm going to start with artifacts. The first artifact is Sol Ring. Obviously, if you've played Commander for more than 3 minutes, you probably know that Sol Ring is just kind of an auto-include in Commander decks, so I won't belabor that. For 1 mana, you get something that gives you 2 mana every turn. It's very useful for the price. The next one is Sensei's Divining Top. Now, one of the things that you want to be able to do with this deck, if you can, is to be able to make sure that when you use your commander's ability, that the cards with the higher CMCs are coming up when you draw them, when you draw for that ability, so that your commander does maximum damage around the table. So Sensei's Divining Top will do that for you. It's only one mana to get it onto the field, and then its abilities are look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. So you only pay 1 mana to do that. And that's why that's the ability that we really have this in the deck for. So being able to look at the top 3 cards and move them around because you know you're about to attack and your commander's ability is about to go off is extremely useful, because nothing's worse than setting everything up so that your commander's ability goes off and then you draw a land which has 0 CMC and you don't do any damage. So Sensei's Divining Top allows you to scry your deck a little bit and get, at least of those 3 cards, the highest CMC possible on the top of your deck so that your commander's ability does the most damage whenever it goes off. Next is Swiftfoot Boots. This is in here to protect your ninjas, particularly your commander. So it's very cheap, 2 to field and 1 to equip, and equipped creature has hexproof and haste. So I have this in here for both of those abilities. Hexproof in order to protect your commander and other ninja who need to be able to stick to the field in order for their abilities to work. And also haste so that when you get a ninja down, you can attack with them immediately. Because once your opponent cottons to what your deck does, if they're not familiar with it, they will realize that they need to focus on killing your ninja and your unblockable stuff as quickly as they can so that your ability doesn't go off. So that'll help protect it a little bit. Also, Prowler's Helm. Equipped creature can't be blocked except by walls. So 2 CMC to get it on the field and 2 to equip it. That's just unblockableness to whatever creature you need to have unblockable. So we've already been through our creatures. We know that some of them are not unblockable. So we need the ability to give them unblockable so that we have the flexibility that we need in order to keep our deck moving fast. Lightning Greaves, equipped creature has haste and shroud, 2 mana to get it on the field, 0 mana to equip it. So this is another one. The shroud can protect your creatures and the haste can get them attacking immediately. The one thing that you need to be aware of using Lightning Greaves is shroud is different than hexproof. Hexproof involves protection from your opponents, but shroud is protection from everything. So if you have like an enchantment or something like that that you want to attach to a creature, it's not going to work if you have Lightning Greaves attached, because shroud will prevent that from happening. Still, I think it's useful, and especially with that 0 equip cost, you can move it around pretty easily on your turn, and you probably won't have that kind of problem even come up. All right, Dimir Signet is some mana generation. You can convert colorless mana into a blue and a black. So that's your commander's ninjutsu ability paid for right there. So that's kind of a no-brainer, putting that in there to give yourself some advantage with mana. Blade of Selves is, I think, an interesting one to put into this deck. Equipped creature has Myriad. If you don't know what Myriad is, it's whenever it attacks, for each opponent other than the defending player, you may put a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker he or she controls. Exile the tokens at end of combat. So if you put a Blade of Selves onto an unblockable ninja and attack, then you have, in a 4-player game, you have 3 more copies of that unblockable ninja also attacking, which means your commander's ability goes off 3 more times than it would have if you didn't have Blade of Selves equipped. So that can wreak a lot of havoc. You can dish out a whole lot of damage all at once very quickly if you do that, because the way your commander's ability works, everybody at the table that's not you takes damage on each of those activations. So that means, let's say you have one ninja that attacks, that's the equivalent of 4 ninjas hitting, and that means you're using your commander's ability 4 times instead of 1, and that means the other 3 players at the table are getting hit 4 times and 3 times. So pretty useful all the way around. Whisper Silk Cloak is, that's a pretty easy one to decide to put into this deck. It grants unblockable. It grants Shroud, so we may want to be a little bit careful for the same reason that we were careful with Lightning Greaves. But being able to move unblockableness around to different creatures is very useful. And then the last one I have in here is Immortal Sun. This is in here partly because of my own group's meta. So the Immortal Sun says that players can't activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities. So I have some people in my meta who play certain Planeswalkers that are really hard to deal with. The one that comes to mind is the Sorin that can instantly reduce your life total to 10. This prevents that kind of shenanigans from happening. And since this deck doesn't have any Planeswalkers in it, it doesn't affect us at all. It just keeps all the other Planeswalkers under control. Additionally, at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card, a little card advantage. I don't think we probably need card advantage that much, since your commander's ability is literally drawing you cards into your hand every time it goes off, but it doesn't necessarily hurt either. And then spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. That's always nice. And then creatures you control get +1/+1. Also, nice little bonus. But it's mainly in there if you need to control Planeswalkers. If you don't have a problem with Planeswalkers in your group's meta, feel free to substitute something else in here that will be of more use to you. All right, let's talk about the enchantments. Now, the enchantments are where we can do some fancy tricks to make sure that we have more unblockableness and more ninja-ness in our board state. So the first one, Aqueous Form, enchanted creature can't be blocked. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, scry 1. All right, so it gives us an opportunity to do a little bit of scrying, which can be helpful, as we talked about earlier with Sensei's Divining Top. But more importantly, for the cost of 1 blue, you can make any of your creatures unblockable. So that's a no-brainer to put in here in a deck that relies on unblockableness. Next up is Smoke Shroud. This is a ninja-themed card, but it's also very useful. So it's not just in here because it's a ninja-themed card. It reads, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. So there's flying again. That's potential unblockableness, depending on what you're going up against. And then whenever a ninja enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Smoke Shroud from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to that creature. So this is just for only 2 CMC to play it initially, and then you get it for free every time after that. You just get to keep pulling it from your graveyard. It's like a free buff where you keep getting that +1/+1 and you keep getting the flying. So really, I don't think it hurts to have it in there. It's going to be useful in several situations. And to be able to just keep recurring it, you're getting a lot of value for only the 2 mana that you're spending. Next up is Invisibility. Enchanted creature can't be blocked except by walls. So not a whole lot of players use walls. I mean, you might see them occasionally. They're out there, but I don't feel like too many players use them, at least not in my experience. Most of the time, you're not going to have to worry about walls being an obstacle, and you'll be able to use this to make one of your creatures unblockable for only 2 mana. Aether Tunnel is another one. In addition to becoming unblockable, it also gets +1/+0. So little tiny buff in addition to it. Again, only 2 CMC. Propaganda was one that I kind of weighed whether I wanted to include it, and ultimately I decided to put it in here because it's always nice to have your opponent blink a little when they're thinking about attacking you. So Propaganda reads, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 colorless mana for each creature they control that's attacking you. So if they used up all their mana and now they're thinking about attacking you, then you're covered. They can't attack you. If you're going up against a creature-heavy deck, or maybe a deck that creates a whole lot of creature tokens, then this is great for not getting swarmed by all of that. So this is partly in here because there's one player, actually 2 players in my meta that have really difficult to deal with decks that create lots of creature tokens. And I'm always getting swarmed with fairies or soldiers from these decks. So I put it in there partly because of that too, just to sort of rein that in a little bit and give me some breathing room. All right, the next one is Mirror Maid. Mirror Maid reads, you may have Mirror Maid enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. So this is very useful for copying anything that your opponents have, or you can copy something that you've got that you might want to get a little more use out of. You could double up on Propaganda, like I was talking about earlier, or you know, I've had this become copies of things like Rhystic Study, or you can even copy, you know, one of your cards that gives unblockable, like Aqueous Form, for example. There's lots of options as to what you can do with this. And since it copies artifacts as well, then you can copy things like Whispersilk Cloak if you want to, or you can copy like a Mana Rock. You can, if you don't have any other use for it, it never hurts to have another Soul Ring or something like that. So at only 3 CMC, that's a pretty good workhorse. The next one is Infiltrator's Mage Mark. This is another creature enchantment. Creatures you control that are enchanted get +1/+1 and can't be blocked except by creatures with Defender. Again, I don't personally see too many instances of Defender when I play Commander. It's out there some, but I feel like many times you won't have to worry about that either. And this is just another good way, good inexpensive way to get unblockable. All right, the next one is Arcane Adaptation. And this reads, as Arcane Adaptation enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Okay, so at the beginning of this video, I alluded a little bit to making your other cards into ninjas, and this is one of the ways that you can do it. Once you get Arcane Adaptation onto the field, for only 3 CMC, you make everything a ninja. So everything can potentially set off your commander's abilities. And everything that comes onto the board is a ninja too. So this is a great way to just basically put an extra sword in every hand of every creature that you have, because they're going to have that opportunity to hit for even more with your commander's ability going off. And then getting into the 5 CMC range here with our enchantments, Xenograft reads, as Xenograft enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Each creature you control is the chosen type in addition to its other types. So it's doing the same thing as Arcane Adaptation. It's giving you the opportunity to turn everything else into a ninja. So super useful. It's more expensive, but it's also another chance in your deck for you to be able to get that thing onto the field, because you can't necessarily rely on always drawing Arcane Adaptation out of a 100-card deck. Followed Footsteps is next. Enchant Creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a token that's a copy of Enchanted Creature onto the battlefield. So if you have a particular ninja that really works for you, like maybe Mistblade Shinobi, like we were talking about earlier, that every time it hits, it removes one of your opponent's creatures, or throws it back into their hand, and you want to just keep doing that, then tuck this onto that creature, and you just get to create a copy every turn. And if your opponent doesn't like that, then they have to waste one of their instant removal spells or something like that in order to get rid of it. So I think this is pretty useful in that regard. You can do some damage with it. You can create a little army if it goes unchecked. The next one is Dire Undercurrents. Whenever a blue creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player draw a card. So there's some card advantage for you. You get to draw some cards. Whenever a black creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player discard a card. So you can turn that around on your opponents and start having them discard. And since there's a lot of blue and black in this deck, that ability is going to be going off all the time. Plus, blue and black are very popular colors in Magic. And there's, in a four-person game, you're essentially guaranteed that other people are going to be playing those colors too. And then the last enchantment is Conspiracy. This is an older card, but it got reprinted recently as of the recording of this video. So you shouldn't have too much trouble getting your hands on it. And it reads, as Conspiracy comes into play, choose a creature type. Creature cards you own that aren't in play, creature spells you control, and creatures you control are the chosen type. So this is the third of the three things that make everything else in your deck a ninja, including anything that you've copied from your opponents. So if you decided to use those cards that we looked at earlier that copied one of your opponent's big guns or something like that, or copied your opponent's commander or something, then that is now a ninja as well. All right, let's look at our instant spells next. Not too many of them in this deck. I tend to rely more on, when I play this deck, I tend to rely more on just I focus on getting the unblockable attacks in and trying to, be as fast as possible with that. But there's still some very useful ones that I keep in the deck. The first one is Tragic Slip, which I think is kind of an undervalued card. I love it. It's 1 black for the following effects. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or you can cast it under Morbid Conditions. That creature gets -13/-13 until end of turn instead if a creature died this turn. So this is a great revenge card. If they take out one of your creatures, you can immediately slap this down for only the cost of 1 swamp and kill something that has invincible, kill something that they probably thought was pretty well stuck to the board and wasn't going anywhere. Even the really big creatures are, once you get into -13/-13, that's still going to be really good odds of being able to remove even a really big creature. So this is a nice way to have an answer to losing a significant card of yours, or also to slap back at a player that has removed something of yours and just sort of show them that, hey, bad things will happen to you if you remove my cards, so that maybe they'll think about attacking somebody else. The next one is Cyclonic Rift, and this card is kind of infamous among Magic players, especially I think Commander players. It's a great card, but it's crazy powerful. It's also a little bit expensive. I've only got one. I decided to go ahead and pay a little extra for it because it is such a great card, and I really wanted it for this deck, and it's worth it. This card is a game-winning card. If you play this at the right time and you've set up the right circumstances, this can win you the game. So let's take a closer look at it in case you're not familiar with it. It reads, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Now that's kind of useful for 2 CMC, but what really makes this card work is if you cast it for its overload cost. So for 7 CMC, you may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each. So instead, the card reads, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. That basically means you wipe every other player's board state and yours remains intact, and then you are free to do whatever you're going to do. It's brutal, and I recommend maybe don't play it all the time because you may make people angry because it is really rough. You know, someone can have spent like 40 mana getting their board state going, and then you drop this in and just, it's gone. You know, all those turns are gone, all that mana is gone. They have to start over. The next one is Cackling Counterpart. And this is a kind of a neat one that I put in here for creating more ninjas. So it reads, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. You can do that for 3 CMC, that's not bad. But it also has flashback. So you can, for 7 CMC, you can cast it again from your graveyard and do the same thing again. So you have the opportunity down the road, if you need to create another copy of a creature, then you can do that with this. Now, this is kind of handy. It's doubly handy if you've managed to do that trick we talked about earlier, where you used, let's go back and look at it here, Spark Double. If you use that to create a copy of your commander that is non-legendary, and you cast Cackling Counterpart on that, then you have 3 copies of your commander. And then if you cast Flashback, you could potentially have 4 copies of your commander. So every time a ninja hits, every single ninja that hits would be activating this ability 4 times. So you can see how that gets pretty brutal. It takes a little bit of setup to get there, but it's pretty nasty if you can make it happen. The next card is Supplant Form. Return target creature to its owner's hand. You put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that creature. So this obviously works for taking a creature out of play during a key moment. Since it's an instant, if you have the mana, if you've held the mana back and are able to cast it, then Supplant Form can, you know, remove a big creature that's coming at you, and then you get a copy of that creature, and then they have to, your opponent has to spend the mana to recast it, and then you can, you know, block it with the same creature. So it is pretty useful in that regard. You can also cast this on your own creatures, though. So if you want to, you could use this in a pinch to create a copy of something. So again, Spark Mage is your commander. You use this to return Spark Mage to your owner's hand, but you're creating a copy of it. So you can pull some shenanigans there and maybe get some interesting stuff onto the board. All right, and then the last instant is Nexus of Fate. And I have this in for 2 reasons. Well, 3 reasons. I had it, and I always kind of wanted to use it because I think it's a cool card. But I think it's also is actually useful in this deck. So the 2 reasons that I have it in here is, first of all, it's an instant card that causes you to take an extra turn after this one. So that means that you can, at any point in the game, as long as nobody counters it, you can take an extra turn after the current turn. So in a 4-person game, somebody does something that changes your strategy, or that you feel like you can take advantage of if you can act in that key moment, then you can cast Nexus of Fate and take a turn while the game is in the middle of going around the table and people taking their turns. You take a turn out of turn, and you get an extra turn in that round, and you get to insert yourself into that moment and be able to do a thing that's maybe going to help you win the game, or knock out another player or something like that. So no matter what way you slice it, being able to take an extra turn is a very powerful effect. And then the other thing that's kind of useful on it is it says, if Nexus of Fate would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle it into its owner's library instead. So for some reason, this has happened to me lots of times, where I've had to, I have more than 7 cards in my hand, and I don't have a Reliquary Tower or something going, and I have to discard cards. That always feels bad, having to discard cards, but this one, you don't have to discard it. You just put it back into your deck, and it's still in there, and it's maybe going to come up again. And the other thing that's good about it is it is 7 CMC. So, going back to our commander's ability, that this whole thing is built around activating, being able to draw this as your ninjutsu activation, or your commander's ability activation, means that you're doing 7 damage to everybody at the table. So that's not bad either. All right, let's have a look then at the sorcery cards. So the first one is Demonic Tutor. This is a card that's probably pretty familiar to most Magic players. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. Demonic Tutor is kind of an expensive card, but for good reason. It's an extremely efficient tutor that allows you to get anything from your deck and put it into your hand for only 2 mana cost. So yeah, it's amazing. It's worth it if you're on the fence about do I want to shell out the money to get a copy of this. I'd say it's worth it to have 1 copy. If you really have a deck that you think might benefit from it. This will allow you to get that key piece of equipment that you need. Like maybe you really need Whispersilk Cloak because you just haven't drawn any creatures yet that have unblockable, and you need to get unblockable going. Then you can go and get that Whispersilk Cloak and start, getting your unblockable actions going. The next one is Rite of Replication. And it has a kicker on it where you can pay 5, an additional 5 when you cast the spell. Now I have this in here with the intention that I would be paying the kicker. So I would be paying 9 for casting this. But here's why I would pay 9. Put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature. If Rite of Replication was kicked, put 5 of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. All right, so potentially 5 unblockable ninjas is a game-winning situation on the board. If the board state is correct and you're able to get this out at the right time, and you can pay the mana to kick this for the full cost, imagine being able to put 5 more unblockable ninjas down, and then let's say maybe your commander's ability was going to go off 3 times that turn, but instead it now goes off 8 times. So I think you can see why I don't mind paying the 9 for this. the board state's not going to be right to use it every time, but it is a wonderfully vicious option if it does happen. All right, and the next is stolen identity. This reads, create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature. Okay, so that's useful, but it costs 6. Is it that useful? Is it 6 mana cost useful? It is, because it's got Cipher. Cipher reads, then you may exile this spell card encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. So put this, use Cipher and attach this to a creature that you want a lot of, and you only pay that 6 mana cost one time, and then you get a steady supply of that creature coming onto the board every time the conditions are right. So to me, that's more unblockable ninjas. You guys are probably sensing a theme there. Next up is In Garruk's Wake. And this is a rather expensive spell. It's 9 CMC. Destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Okay, so this is in here for 2 reasons. One, obviously, it's a very good board wipe because it destroys everyone else's creatures and not yours. So you can really thin out the herd. And then also the 9 CMC is actually good, even though it's expensive, because if you draw this off of your commander's ability, that's 9 damage to everybody at the table. So that's another reason why I keep this in here. It's a expensive card, but it serves 2 purposes. All right, and then our other 9 CMC card is Expropriate. Expropriate is another kind of infamous card. You probably, if you watch the Command Zone at all, if you watch their channel, they talk about both Cyclonic Rift and Expropriate quite a bit for good reason. This is another game-winning card. It reads, starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, take an extra turn after this one. For each money vote, choose a permanent owned by the voter and gain control of it. Then exile Expropriate. So this is one of those cards where you just can't lose, basically. Because no matter what they pick, they only have 2 choices and both choices benefit you. A lot of time people are reluctant to choose to give you one of their creatures because they don't want to give you their stuff, right? Like nobody really wants to do that. So they're kind of tempted to just give you an extra turn. But the secret is an extra turn is even more powerful than you getting one of their creatures. They're better off just picking their worst creature and giving you that. But for some reason, a lot of people don't do that. So that means you're either getting creatures, which you can use to block or attack or whatever you want, or you're getting an extra turn. And if more than one person selects extra turn, you're just in such a ridiculously good position that it's going to be hard for you to lose the game. Now, I realized while I'm looking at the sorceries here, I skipped one and I didn't mean to. And that's Mastermind's Acquisition. So this is our other tutor. Now, originally in this deck, I had Diabolic Tutor, which is the same thing as Demonic Tutor. It just costs more. It costs 4 CMC instead of the 2 CMC for Demonic Tutor. But I substituted in Mastermind's Acquisition when I found it because it's just objectively better. So it reads, choose one, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So Perfect Tutor card allows you to get anything you want. But the other part is choose a card you own from outside the game and put it into your hand. Let that sink in for a moment. Choose a card you own from outside the game and put it into your hand. So you can choose a card from your sideboard. You can choose a card from your collection, or you can choose a card that has been exiled, because cards that are exiled are outside of the game. So there are very, very few ways to get a card out of exile in Magic the Gathering. Very few ways, but this is one of them. If you don't mind paying the relatively low cost of 4 CMC, you can get a card out of exile. So if somebody exiles something that really makes your deck work, or that you know you need at exactly the right moment, or maybe they're milling your cards into exile and you know you just lost something that you need, you can go get it. In fact, you can even go get expropriate. Expropriate calls for you to exile it at the end of its use. So you think you only get to use it once, right? But actually, you could use it twice with this. So it's interesting, isn't it? The trickiness that you can do. Now, like I said, there's no planeswalkers in this deck. I do have a suggestion for a planeswalker. If you don't want to use Immortal Sun because you want to put a planeswalker in or something like that, there is a really useful planeswalker for this deck, and it's Mu Yanling. She has a +2 ability on her that says that target creature can't be blocked this turn. So right away that plays into what we're trying to do, right? Her next ability, -3, is draw 2 cards. So being able to draw cards having that option is never bad, right? And then she has a big time mega ability that is -10, and that's tap all creatures your opponents control. You take an extra turn after this one. So we've already talked about why extra turns are so valuable. If she remains on the battlefield through and nobody gets rid of her, and she gets up to 10, you can get an extra turn out of her. Otherwise, you're going to wind up just having an opportunity to make some of your creatures unblockable. And maybe she gets up to that she gets up to 10, and you can use the -10 ability if nobody can do anything about her before she gets there. You know, she's going to get there in 3 turns. So depending on what's going on, they may, you know, sometimes planeswalkers can be kind of vulnerable in that regard. So you may want to give some thought into how you're going to defend her if you really want her to stick on the board. And then also she's a 6 CMC, so she's not too shabby for, you know, activating your commander's ability also. Now, I thought I might also mention a few things that might be useful for you in terms of upping the value of your commander's ability. So let me find the right stuff here. Here we go. So I do have some sideboard cards here that have very high CMCs that would cause your commander's ability to do even more damage. So a few of those cards are Temporal Trespass, which is 11 CMC, and it's actually a get another turn card also. So you could consider putting that in there. If you need an extra turn card and you don't mind paying the very high cost for it, then there's that possibility. Also, you know, if you just want to have this in there as potentially a card that you could maybe scry with, or hope that Sensei's Divining Top finds this, you might be able to, you know, do even more damage, do 11 damage. Another thing that's worth mentioning is a particular rule in Magic that benefits ninja decks. It's a sort of little known rule, but it's actually potentially very useful for our commander's ability. And that rule is that split cards, such as this one, Rags to Riches, their CMC is the total that is on the card's face. So what that means is normally when you play it, you pick one or the other, right? Like you say, all right, I'm going to play the Rags side of it. I'm going to pay 4 CMC, and all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Or you pay the Riches part and you do that effect. So they're meant to be kind of flexible cards. But what they do for us is they create a very high potential damage from our commander's ability, because technically for our commander's ability, we add up the entirety of the CMC that goes on to, that is pictured on this card. So Rags is 4 CMC and Riches is 7 CMC. So we have 11 CMC for this card, 11 damage that you can possibly distribute to everyone around the table. Time Stretch is another one. Target player takes 2 extra turns after this one. The people in your group may hate you after you play this, and it's also a 10 CMC card, so that's 10 damage around the table. Curse of the Cabal is another potential one, 10 CMC. 9 CMC for Plague Wind, and it's also a very good board wipe. Destroy all creatures that you don't control. And then here's another one. I'm trying to read these sideways. Connive and Concoct. So again, we're adding all of that up. And then, these are actually just useful cards anyway that might present you with some opportunities to do things. Clone Legion, another high CMC, allows you to create more clones. Beacon of Tomorrows gives you an extra turn, and it's got an 8 CMC. Temporal Mastery is 7 CMC, gives you another turn. Kindred Dominance is another good board wipe, 7 CMC, and gives you that board wipe option where you can choose a creature type and destroy all creatures that are not of that type, so you can protect your ninjas and do whatever you need to do. All right, lastly, let's just briefly take a look at the lands. The lands that I have in this deck are fairly standard, but I did put some in here that are designed to fit with the assassination theme of this deck. Ninjas being assassins, you want them to be able to do clever things that assassinate your opponents. So Arcane Lighthouse is very useful for that. It has the special ability, until end of turn, creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and shroud and can't have hexproof or shroud. So if you're having trouble getting to something, or you want to open up one of your opponents to be preyed on by another one of your opponents who you think might, do some targeted removal or something like that, then that's a good one to just pop that off and then stand back and let the carnage ensue. Bojuka Bog is great. It exiles all cards from target player's graveyard. So if you have a player doing some graveyard shenanigans, then this is really nice to have, because it'll mess them up in that regard. Other things like Command Tower and Cascading Cataracts just give you opportunities to create the mana that you need. Creeping Tar Pit is kind of a neat little one. It gives you a blue or a black mana, but it also can become a 3/2 blue and black elemental creature that is unblockable. So if you throw on one of your haste artifacts, then you could have a creature, an unblockable creature, attack in a pinch. You can essentially just create a creature that is unblockable for that turn, and then it goes back to being a land. Detection Tower is Another one that's a part of that assassination theme I was talking about. This one, until end of turn, your opponents and creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be targets of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. So another way to get around that if you need to. And then I have the usual blue-black generating mana that you might expect in here. I originally had more of these, but I took a lot of them out in order to just have some plain Jane islands and swamps, just to kind of speed things up. And I still might take some more of these fancy lands out in the future and just put in more plain lands because there is something to be said for being able to put something on the board that doesn't come in tapped, but just immediately starts working for you. A few other ones, Forge of Heroes is a nice one. If you're having to, if you want to buff up your commander a little bit, it reads, choose target commander that entered the battlefield this turn. Put a 1/1 counter on it if it's a creature and a loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. So your commander enters with this deck, your commander enters very easily. And this might potentially be a way for you to buff Yuriko up periodically if you want to, Halimar Depths has a special ability on it that it might be useful also. When Halimar Depths enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. So the same basic effect as Sensei's Divining Top. If you time all of this correctly, then you'll be able to, get the highest CMC at the top of your deck for when your commander's ability goes off. So that's a nice little land option that has that effect. Maze of Ith, this deck can be a little bit vulnerable because it doesn't have a whole lot in the way of blockers, and it's kind of limited in terms of instants and answers to things because so much of it is focused on just making one thing happen. So Maze of Ith is in here to turn away dangerous creatures. So it says, all you have to do is tap it. It's a land. It doesn't generate any mana, but if you tap it, it reads, untap target attacking creature. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. So this can get you out of a couple of jams. If a creature is coming at you, it can get you out of that jam. If you have a creature that you suddenly realize that you're going to lose because you miscalculated, then you can save that creature using Maze of Ith also. Mystic Sanctuary. When Mystic Sanctuary enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. So it could be useful if you want to get something like Tragic Slip back and use it again, then that's not bad. If you want to get a really useful card like Cyclonic Rift back. This is the kind of land that you want to hold on to as long as you can and play other lands before you play this one. If this is the only one that you can play, then you got to go ahead and just eat that in order to keep the tempo of your lands going and make sure you're making your mana drops. But if you can hold on to it and then use it at the right time, you have a nice little option there. This one is kind of neat. It reads, if a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard a card, you may reveal that card and put it on top of your library instead of putting it anywhere else. I put this one in because there's some people in my meta that tend to have mill decks or have you, discard cards and, things like that. They just sort of mess with your deck. So I put this in here to guard against that. I might take it out if, it just sort of depends on what my group is playing. And then this one also has kind of a neat little retaliation ability. I talked earlier about retaliating to just sort of give people pause about attacking you again. This one, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So if somebody hits you and you have this available, you know, you can knock them back a little bit. And again, that's a very optional card, but I kind of like having that option to always have an answer when someone comes after you. Opal Palace is another one that interacts with your commander's colors. So it's kind of a useful one. Add to your mana pool 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. If you spend this mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it, equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. So mainly it's in there as a mana filter, but also there are times when you want to hard cast your commander with this deck because you know you just didn't get the right draws and you need to get her onto the field. So this helps with that a little bit because you can buff her up in the process. Takes a little bit of the sting of hard casting her out. Reliquary Tower, you see this in a lot of commander decks. It makes sure that you have no maximum hand size. That's in there again, partly because of my meta, because I have one particular player who likes to play hug decks, group hug decks, where everybody's drawing tons of cards, and I hate that because I always wind up discarding a lot of cards. And on top of drawing those cards, this deck draws a lot because of the commander's ability, so it can actually be really detrimental if you don't have something like Reliquary Tower. So I think it's nice to have in there as an option. Rogue's Passage, I think, is a must-have for this deck. It's if you pay for and tap it, you can make target creature unblockable that turn. So you can create unblockableness as needed. And then let's see. The last one is Witch's Cottage, which I just kind of threw in here because it does have a potentially useful ability. When Witch's Cottage enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. So I put this in here because if the circumstances line up, you can not only get a creature back that you might need that maybe left the battlefield before you were ready for them to, but also this might allow you to manage what is on top of your deck when your commander's ability goes off. So let's say maybe you've already used Sensei's Divining Top and you know you got nothing. Those 3 cards that you looked at were all lands and you know you're not going to do any damage. Maybe you get lucky and you have Witch's Cottage, and that can pull something like Silent Blade Oni with its much more significant mana cost onto the top of your deck, and then all of a sudden your commander's ability has some potency again. So, like I said, many of these are just options. Everybody does their lands a little bit differently. I hope this gives you guys a good sense of one of the ways that a ninja deck can be played and how to really take advantage of what a ninja deck wants to do. You know, it really wants to be able to do that sneaky damage and to have that sneaky damage go off quickly and painfully for everybody at the table. And if you can pull that off, then you can end games very quickly. And at the very least, you're going to have an interesting, fun time, because this is not only a very fun deck to play that does a lot of neat things, a lot of clever tricks like you might expect ninjas to do, but it's also kind of fun to see how people react to this deck, because there's a lot of suspense whenever you draw that card off of your commander's ability. You know, I always draw it out a little bit. I lift the card up and I you know, put it down and I talk about what it might potentially be, just to sort of torture everybody, all in good fun, of course. But then you dramatically reveal it, and it's a surprise for you just as much as it is for everybody else, because you don't know what it's going to be. It might be a soul ring and you only do 1 damage to everybody, or it might be expropriate and you do a big amount of damage to everybody. But whatever you wind up doing, it's going to be fun. This is one of the most fun decks I've ever made. And even though my group that I play with kind of knows what it can do now, I still like to break it out periodically and play with it, even though they kind of know all the tricks, because it's just so much fun to play with. And they gripe about it a little bit, but I think if I really pressed them, they would probably say that they have fun with it too. All right, so I hope this video was really useful for you, and until next time.